everyone. So we are going to pick back up at the bottom of page 62. Our focus for these pages. So in this scene, there's going to be a dramatic fight. I'm not going to spoil it. Well, it's between Curly and Lenny. You'll see. Why? So my question to you, why is the injury that occurs significant? And then I want you to tell me, are Lenny's actions good or bad? Maybe that spoiled it a little bit, but let's go ahead and read it anyways. Okay, so we're going to start again at the bottom of page 62, reread these last few lines, and then Curly's rage exploded. So remember, this is when Curly turns on Lenny and becomes pugnacious towards him. So, then Curly's rage exploded. "Come on, you big bastard. Get up on your feet. You big son of a bitch is going to laugh at me. I'll show you who's yeller." Lenny looked helplessly at George, and then he got up and tried to retreat. Curly was balanced and poised. He slashed at Lenny with his left, and then smashed down his nose with a right. Lenny gave a cry of terror. Blood welled from his nose. "George," he cried, "make him let me alone, George." He backed until he was against the wall, and Curly followed, slugging him in the face. Lenny's hands remained at his sides. He was too frightened to defend himself. George was on his feet, yelling, "Get him, Lenny! Don't let him do it!" Lenny covered his face with his huge paws and bleated with terror. He cried, "Make him stop, George!" Then Curly attacked his stomach and cut off his wind. Slim jumped up. "That dirty little rat," he cried. "I'll get him myself." George put his hand and grabbed Slim. "Wait a minute," he shouted. He cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled, "Get him, Lenny!" Lenny took his hands away from his face and looked about for George, and Curly slashed his eyes. The big face was covered with blood. George yelled again, "I said get him!" Curly's fist was swinging when Lenny reached for it. The next minute, Curly was flopping like a fish on a line, and his closed fist was lost in Lenny's big hand. George ran down the room. "Let go of him, Lenny! Let go!" But Lenny watched in terror the flopping little man whom he held. Blood ran down Lenny's face. One of his eyes was cut and closed. George slapped him in the face again and again, and still Lenny held on to the closed fist. Curly was white and shrunken by now, and his struggling had become weak. He stood crying, his fist lost in Lenny's paw. George shouted over and over, "Let go his hand, Lenny! Let go! Slim, come help me while the guy's got any hand left." Suddenly, Lenny let go his hold, his crouch cowering against the wall. "You told me to, George," he said miserably. Curly sat down on the floor, looking in wonder at his crushed hand. Slim and Carlson bent over him. Then Slim straightened up and regarded Lenny with horror. "We got to get him to the doctor," he said. "Looks to me like every bone in his hand is bust." "I didn't wanna," Lenny cried. "I didn't want to hurt him." Slim said, "Carlson, you get the candy wagon hitched up. We'll take him into Soledad and get him fixed up." Carlson hurried out. Slim turned to the whimpering Lenny. "It ain't your fault," he said. "This punk sure had it coming to him. But Jesus, he ain't hardly got no hand left." Slim hurried out, and in a moment returned with a tin cup of water. He held it to Curly's lips. George said, "Slim, will we get canned now?" That means fired. "We need the steak. Will Curly's old man can us now?" Slim smiled wryly. He knelt down beside Curly. This is important, pay attention. Slim kneels down next to Curly. "You got your senses in hand enough to listen?" he asked. Curly nodded. "Well, then listen," Slim went on. "I think you got your hand caught in a machine. If you don't tell nobody what happened, we ain't going to. But you just tell and try to get this guy canned, and we'll tell everybody, and then you'll get the laugh." I won't tell," said Curly. He avoided looking at Lenny. Buggy wheels sounded outside. Slim helped Curly up. "Come on now. Carlson's going to take you to a doctor." He helped Curly out the door. The sound of wheels drew away. In a moment, Slim came back into the bunkhouse. He looked at Lenny, still crouched fearfully against the wall. "Let's see your hands," he asked. Lenny stuck out his hands. Christ almighty, I'd hate to have you mad at me, Slim said. George broke in. Lenny was just scared, he explained. He didn't know what to do. I told you nobody ought never to fight him. No, I guess it was Candy I told. Candy nodded solemnly. That's just what you done, he said. Right this morning, when Curly first lit into your friend, you says he better not fool with Lenny if he knows what's good for him. That's just what you says to me. George turned to Lenny. It ain't your fault, he said. You don't need to be scared no more. You done just what I told you to. Maybe you better go in the washroom and clean up your face. You look like hell. Lenny smiled with his bruised mouth. I didn't want no trouble, he said. He walked toward the door, but just before he came to it, he turned back. George? Yeah, what you want? I can still tend the rabbits, George. Sure, you ain't done nothing wrong. I didn't mean no harm, George. Well, get the hell out and wash your face. Come on now. Okay, everyone, so I'm going to play the fight scene for you because I think it's really fun to watch and good, just to give you some visualization of what happens. If you don't want to watch it, you can skip ahead, but it is a lot of fun, so I suggest you do. Son of a bitch is coming after me. Get up. I'll show you who's yelling. Get up. You got no call for that stuff. Get up. Come on. Get up, Early. Lenny, get up. Get up and fight. Get up, and he didn't do nothing. Come on. Leave him alone. Cut it out, Early. Come on, Lenny. Good, Lenny. Fight back. Get him, Lenny. Fight back. Get him, Lenny. Get him. Slip, help me. Lenny. Let go. Lenny. Let go his hand. Let go. Jesus. You told me to, George. You told me to. No. Take it easy now. Calm down. Gotta get him to a doctor. Carlson, get the wagon hitched up. We'll take him into Soledad and get him fixed up. I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't want to hurt him. I know. It ain't your fault, Lenny. This punk had it coming to him. Yeah. Slim. Is Curly's old man gonna can us now? Hey, you hear me? Huh? Hey, you hear me? I think you got your hand caught in the machine. Now, if you don't tell nobody what happened, we ain't going to. But you just tell and try to get this guy canned. We're going to tell everybody what really happened. You got that? Huh? Good. George, you and Whit, give me a hand. Come on. Okay, everyone. So I hope you enjoyed that clip, and hopefully it helps you visualize what's going on a little better. We've got a few questions coming up about the reading and that scene that just happened. So lock in. We'll do these questions, and then the exit ticket, and you guys will be good to go. So Steinbeck uses animal imagery and figurative language throughout the scene. So in one quote, he says, Lenny covered his face with huge paws and bleated with terror. So you think huge paws, you almost think of a bear when you're thinking of Lenny. So why might Steinbeck use the description huge paws instead of something like outstretched hands? So in other words, by describing Lenny with huge paws, what is he emphasizing about Lenny? Go ahead and answer that in 1 to 2 sentences now. Okay, so this description emphasizes Lenny's immense size. So it emphasizes how big Lenny is. It also, by describing him kind of like an animal, shows his capacity for violence and how dangerous Lenny really is. Okay, so that's going to move us into kind of looking at what violence, how violence is used in literature. So violence in real life just is. If someone punches you in the nose in a supermarket parking lot, it's simply aggression. It doesn't contain meaning beyond the act itself. Violence in literature, though, while it is literal, is usually also something else. That same punch in the nose may be a metaphor. So, in other words, when you see violence in literature, it normally has some type of deeper meaning. So while there aren't typically one size fits all explanations for violence, there are some questions readers should ask themselves after reading a scene of violence in a text. So, what injury was sustained, and what might that injury represent? Secondly, why this sort of violence and not some other sort of violence? And then thirdly, what might this act of violence represent thematically? So, let's take a look in your knowledge organizer for Of Mice and Men. Hands has a symbolic representation. Hands can represent three things: work, violence, or responsibility. So, question 5 coming to you. Consider the symbols of hand that we just pointed out. Slim notes that Curly ain't hardly got no hand left. In other words, his hand is completely crushed. It's like, yeah, really messed up. So, what is one reason that this injury might be significant? Why is it significant that Curly has suffered an injury to his hand? Look at these symbolic meanings. Answer in 1 to 2 sentences, 1 to 3 sentences now. So, possible answers, a few different things. So, Curly is a boxer. That's like what he did for a living. And without his hand, with his hand being broken so badly, his career and notoriety, so his fame, are essentially over. Not only that, but Curly's hands represent violence. Okay. So, with his hand being broken, it could symbolize the cycle or pattern of unnecessary violence on the ranch. So, it's just a cycle where violence is just kind of compounds on top of each other and just creates more violence on the ranch. So, let's take you to the last two questions. Question 6. There at the end, you saw Slim, if you watch the movie clip 2, you saw Slim bend over at the table and talk to Curly. How does Slim ensure this incident doesn't get George and Lenny canned or fired? So what does he say to Curly to make sure that this doesn't get George and Lenny fired? So the correct answer is B. So Slim threatens Curly with mockery, essentially. He says that Curly must tell everyone that his hand got caught in a machine, and if he doesn't, Slim threatens to make Curly the laughingstock of the ranch. So think of it this way. Curly is a professional boxer, right? So if he essentially says that if you tell your dad and get Lenny and George fired, we're going to tell everyone we know that you got your hand crushed in a fight by a man. So essentially, like, it would make him a laughing stock of his sport and on the ranch. So that brings us into question 7. What does Steinbeck hope to reinforce about Lenny's character by including this scene of violence? So in other words, what is the author, Steinbeck, trying to show us about Lenny through this scene where this fight occurs and he ends up fighting back against Curly and breaking his hand? Answer in 2 to 4 sentences now. Okay, so a couple things to think about. Lenny has no desire to harm others. He didn't want to fight Curly. He didn't even really know what was going on. And he didn't want to fight him even when he was being punched. However, like an animal driven by survival, he will do what he must to protect himself. And he often does not know when to stop or how to gauge when the threat has passed. So he will act violently to do what he thinks is right for himself and the people he cares about. However, he doesn't know when to stop. It's also important to note that when George is present as his protector, Lenny's violence can be managed, if not entirely controlled. Were Lenny to engage in a violent episode alone, however, it is hard to say what would make him stop. So if George wasn't around, Lenny could potentially be very dangerous. Might be something important to keep in mind as we go forward into the future of the book. Okay, so I hope you guys learned some things. Go ahead and do your exit ticket using the Draw It feature like we did in our live classes yesterday. Good luck, and I will see you live in person tomorrow.